so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life? Well, that's another, which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the reflection and extension of you who will be here each Wednesday interviewing a different consciousness changemaker. And on the other 4 weekdays, leading the way to ensure that your perspective is consistently expanded, your vibration is constantly elevated, and your heart is overflowing and full. Also, before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to take about a minute and a half to tell you about a few sponsors that not only help to make it possible to produce this show 5 days a week, but that I'm also genuinely passionate about promoting. The first longtime stellar supporter of the show that I want to mention is Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online with over 8,000 video titles. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. The second sponsor I'm sincerely passionate about promoting is Purium. It's no mystery that bringing your mind, body, and spirit into balance is necessary if a person truly intends to manifest the greatest and grandest version of themselves. So if you've been looking for a way to easily get organic superfoods into your system every day with a simple plan that can help you reestablish a healthier foundation and relationship with food, like I was doing before I found Purium, I highly recommend going to positivehead.com/transformation and checking out the videos and interviews there where I dive deeply into discussions explaining why I take these products every day. And should you ultimately end up on iShopPurium.com to purchase any of their 50 plus amazing superfood products, be sure to use the code POSITIVEHEAD, all one word, for a 25% discount. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share, I'm very excited to have podcaster extraordinaire Gretchen Rubin here with me on the show. Gretchen is not only the host of the top-rated podcast Happier, but she is also a best-selling author of several books, including her brand new release, Outer Order, Inner Calm, and super excited to have you here. Gretchen, welcome to the show, my friend.
I'm so happy to be talking to you.
Yes. All right, Gretchen, I think we should let them in on the secret that we're actually going to have a Positive Head versus Happier podcast showdown where we embrace our alter egos and vent all the negativity we've been repressing by tearing each other down for the next hour. Yeah. Let's do that.
A venting, rocking, takedown. All right, let's do it.
Let's do it. We'll call it our special negative head edition.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd like to start at the same place I always start. My predictable opening question is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You got 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
Human nature. My passion is human nature. That's everything that I'm most interested in reading about and writing about. All has to do with human nature. Who are we? Why do we do what we do? How can we change?
Oh, I like that question or that passion a lot, rather, because that's right where I'm at. It's like understanding the ultimate nature of reality. Who the heck are we? What are we doing here? All of those things are super fascinating to me. And of course, we're going to dive deep into that. But before we do, why don't you give us a little background? How did you end up, doing what it is you do? You've had an incredible amount of success and, obviously on a unique trajectory. I'd love to hear, how you ended up here.
Absolutely. So I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, which is where I grew up. And I started my career in law. I was actually clerking for Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor when I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a writer. So I switched to being a writer. I wrote several books, including a biography of Winston Churchill and a biography of JFK. And then I wrote a book that's probably still the book that I'm most well known for, which is The Happiness Project. Which came out 10 years ago, and which is an account of a year I spent thinking about ancient wisdom, contemporary science, lessons from pop culture about how to be happier. Could I make myself happier? So I did a happiness project. Spoiler alert, I did make myself happier. Then I wrote a book called Happier at Home, which was all about going deep into the subject of home, which for many people, including me, is kind of at the core of happiness. I wrote a book called Better Than Before, which is all about habit change, because I realized that a lot of times people, we know very well what would make us happier. We know we'd be happier if we saw our friends or got more sleep or ate better or put down our devices, but we're having trouble following through. So habits are a huge helpful tool in doing that kind of thing. So I wrote a book about habits. And as I was writing about habits, I stumbled on, I discovered this personality framework where I realized that people fall into 4 categories: upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels, in a way that's very useful when you're thinking about how to set yourself up to have a happier life. So I wrote a book called The 4 Tendencies. And then my most recent book that you mentioned, Outer Order, Inner Calm, it's about something that's been interesting to me for like a decade, which is, why is it that for most people, not everyone, but for most people, outer order contributes to inner calm more than it should? I mean, we can all agree that a crowded coat closet is kind of trivial in the context of a happy life. And yet over and over, people tell me I cleaned out my office and I feel like I can do anything. I feel like I've 10 pounds lighter and I feel so focused and so energized by that. And so I really wanted to look closely at that connection, because I get very energized by it too. And I was always curious about that. So I wanted to write a book about that. And as you mentioned, I also have a podcast called Happier with Gretchen Rubin, which is a weekly podcast that I do with my sister, my co-host, Elizabeth Kraft. She's a big TV writer and producer who lives in Hollywood. And so every week we talk about strategies and ideas and hacks and our own experiences in trying to be happier.
Very, very cool. That's quite the journey. And, what I love about having authors, and especially people who have authored, multiple books, for me, as I find myself juggling lots of projects and very busy, I read less than I ever have. And with the help of Audible, I've helped to course correct that a little bit, being able to listen to books. But I used to read so much. And now what I love about the show is being able to have wonderful authors on and sort of get at least the cliff notes, a peek into their work. So we'll definitely do some of that. I'd love to get some insight into the books, and you touched on them just a little bit, but maybe a little deeper dive. Before we do, why don't we talk a little bit about your podcast? How long have you been doing that?
We just hit our 4th anniversary. Well, we just hit our 4th anniversary. So we've done it without a break for 4 years.
That's about what I am at. I'm getting close to that. I'm getting close to 4 years.
Podcast years, we're very venerable. That makes you very, very established in podcast world. Every week we do an episode that's sort of between 30 and 40 minutes. That's the two of us. And I also do a really fun one called A Little Happier, which is every Monday. I do a very short one, like between 2 and 4 minutes. That's sort of like a little teaching story about happiness. And that's kind of different format, also very fun.
Yep. Nice. Yeah, I actually checked out one of those where you were talking about Avatar and how, what the movie Avatar and what stuck over time, for you. And I thought that was an interesting thing when you think back. It jumped out to me because I have this thing where remembering movies, for some reason, I have a blind spot unless it's one of my very favorites. I'll be like, my son will say, "Hey, let's watch this movie," and we'll start watching. I'm like, "Hold on, I've already seen this," and I just kind of forgot it, And I think our brain does that sometimes. It just grabs onto the things that really stick, really stick for you, and sort of gets rid of the rest, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So how is it, I actually work with my brother as well in another project, a travel company that I own, we own together. And so, working very closely with my brother, of course, it has its ups and downs. For the most part, we do really, really well together. How's it been working with your sister on the show as a co-host?
It's been fantastic. And it's funny. It's like sort of one of these dream come true kind of things, because for years we'd been saying that we wanted to collaborate. But she lives in Los Angeles. I live in New York, and, different time zones, and we're both very busy. And we tried to write a YA novel together. That didn't work. And so we'd always been saying, like, we should have a radio show together. And then when this idea of doing a podcast came up, I was like, they said to me, "Do you want to do a podcast? And if so, do you want to have a co-host?" I was like, "Yes, I do. And I want to do it with my sister." And so it's been great because she's one of the most important people in my life. And this is just like, we were always close, but now it's like on top of all of our sisterly stuff, we also work together. So we're so much more close connection. We have all these sisterly adventures, like when we go to a conference together, when we do a live event together. We share kind of coworkers. So, because I work by myself, I have a lot of people I collaborate with, but essentially I'm working by myself. So I love having the chance to work with other people. And of everybody in my life, I have probably the least conflict with my sister of anyone. So she's very easy to work with. And it is called Happier with Gretchen Rubin. And kind of how that plays out is my name is on it and I do most of the work. So sometimes people are like, "Oh, is this fair?" I'm like, Elizabeth feels like it's very fair. So I really do a lot of the sort of the grunt work around it, or kind of the prep work and setup work around it. Because it is mine. It has my name on it. It's sort of like, and for her, and she's got her own podcast called Happier in Hollywood that she does with her writing partner, her Hollywood writing partner. And so she's got 2 podcasts, which is kind of amazing. But on this one, she definitely she's talent, but she doesn't have to worry about things like, writing the show script and stuff like that.
Like Zencaster, right?
No, she would not be worrying about the Zencaster. No, that would not be her problem. Yeah.
That's a recording platform for those of you who are like, "What the heck's that?"
Yeah, if we're a guest and like we need to get copies of the book, like I'm the one that's like, how do we get a copy of the book? And here's Elizabeth's email, here's Elizabeth's mailing address, kind of thing. So it works out. So it works out well, because I think it's one of those. It's a good example where it's all about expectations. If people's expectations are clear, then there's so much less chance for like resentment or anger. We worked it out in advance, like who was going to do what and why. And again, because she's my sister, it's very easy to have straightforward conversations. I feel like we don't have drama. I know that if she's annoyed with me, she'll just say, like, "I'm annoyed." Or if I'm like, "You need to answer this email because like I really need it today," it's fine. So it's really just been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful thing.
Excellent. That's really that's really great to hear, actually, because me and my brother, we work together really well, but we still have some of those things, those triggers with each other where it's like, hold on, this is like moved from working together to reflections from when we were 10 and 12 and battling out who's right or wrong just for the sake of being right or wrong, although it's gotten way better in recent years. So I definitely overall I would say I very much enjoy working with him, and he definitely knows me better than anyone, I would say. So, let me ask you this. So with my podcast, I often will talk about this idea of we teach best what we most need to learn. And so, of course, on my show, of course, I'm giving a lot of perspectives and advice on, the ultimate nature of reality and how to navigate your life and so forth. And so I'm curious, what have you learned from your own podcast? What have you, how have you grown from it?
Well, I mean, my podcast is really a part. It's one expression of my tremendous, my constant inquiry into human nature and kind of my own, my own self. So I think about these things all the time. I think you're exactly right, though. Research is me search. But one of the things that's great about the podcast is one thing that has benefited me tremendously in my approach and in my subject is that the more I hear from people, the better. Like my favorite part of giving a talk is the Q&A. I love giving emails. I love connecting with people on social media because I learn so much. And like when I was coming up with the 4 Tendencies framework, it was like people were giving me examples and insights and questions that so quickly deepened my understanding of it in a way that I could never have done on my own, because it's like, I'm an upholder, and upholders see the world in one way. It was very hard for me to understand how other people saw things, but as I heard from them and engaged with them, then I just got a much richer picture. And so one of the things I love about the podcast is it's like a whole audience that connects with me. Some of these people connect with my books, but some come to me through the podcast first. And because of the subject, we get a tremendous amount of engagement, whether it's emails or voicemails or things on social media, and it's interesting, to know what resonates with people or what doesn't resonate. Sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes you're not that good at predicting what people will really think is insightful or really helps them understand kind of themselves or the world better. Sometimes you can predict that, but sometimes it's surprising. And so for me, it's like this constant way of engaging in a way, I'm constantly running off to the library and getting a giant stack of books. That's a great way to learn, but it's not the same as engaging with people. But in real life, we're so limited in who we know and who we can speak to. Whereas with the beauty of the internet, I mean, I'm getting, heartfelt emails from people living in Singapore about how this plays out in their life. And that has just been, it's helped me so much to understand things better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious about the books, as I mentioned, and the 4 Tendencies. You mentioned people fall into 4 categories, and you've touched a little bit on them. Can you give us a little deeper dive into those categories?
Sure. Now, I'm going to I'll give you a brief description, and most people know what they are just from a brief description. This is not a subtle thing. It turns out it's very obvious to most people. But there is a quiz you can take online. More than 2 million people have taken this little free quiz. If you go to quiz.gretchenrubin.com, you can just take the quiz. It's 11 questions or 12 questions. But again, a lot of times people can just tell from what I'm going to say. So what the 4 Tendencies is looking at, it's looking at a very narrow but significant aspect of your personality, which is how do you respond to expectations, which sounds boring, I know, but it's actually very interesting. So we all face
that sounds interesting to me.
Good. We all face 2 kinds of expectations. Outer expectations, things like a work deadline, a request from a friend. And we have inner expectations, my own desire to keep a New Year's resolution, my own desire to learn to play the ukulele. So depending on how you respond to outer and inner expectations in combination, you're either an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel. So upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations. So they meet the work deadline, they keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what other people expect from them, but their expectations for themselves are just as important. Then there are questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. So they're making everything an inner expectation. If it meets their standard, they'll do it. If it fails their standard, they will push back. They resist anything arbitrary, inefficient, unjustified. They love things that are customized and efficient. Then there are obligers. Obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. And I got my insight into this tendency when a friend said, I know I would be happier if I exercised. And the weird thing is, when I was in high school, I was on the track team, and I never missed track practice. So why can't I go running now? It's like, when you had a team and a coach expecting you to show up, no problem. When you're just trying to go on your own, it's a struggle. And then finally is rebel. Rebel resists all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do, when they want to do it, in their own way, in their own time. They can do anything they want to do, anything they choose to do. But if you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. And typically they don't like to tell themselves what to do. Like they don't want to sign up for a 10 a.m. yoga class on Saturday because they don't know what they're going to want to do on Saturday morning. So they don't want to sign up. So those are the big four. Yes.
Interesting. Which category do you fall into?
Oh, upholder. And like everything became so much clearer to me when I understood that I'm an upholder. Because it's like, because you get a bunch of upholders together, we're like, what is the problem with other people? And we're and it's like, oh yeah, because they're not upholders. So it's a small tendency. Rebel is the smallest, and upholder is only slightly bigger. So it really helped me to understand that kind of a fringe, extreme personality type. How about you? Do you know what you are?
I would say I would say I'm an upholder as well. Like I'm pretty good with setting my own expectations and following through. I mean, not 100% obviously. I have my moments of waffling, but for the most part, it's like, I'm pretty good as long as the outer expectation is reasonable, and I'm actively seeking to engage with that person, right? And then that definitely is the first one that or the one that jumps out to me as me. So,
oh, good, yeah. Well, that's the biggest one for both men and women. The biggest tendency is obliger. So you either are an obliger, or you have many obligers in your life, and then after that is questioner. So actually, it's funny because when upholders give advice about how people should go about doing something, I think we should take into account that we're upholders, because a lot of things that work for upholders don't work that well for other tendencies. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really.
Well, all the tendencies give advice that isn't necessarily that applicable to the other tendencies. It's pretty funny.
and there you have the communication breakdown, folks.
Yes.
Apples and oranges.
But I think this can sort of be too bad, because I think sometimes people, they see that something's working well for somebody else, but it's not working for themselves. And then they start thinking like, well, what's wrong with me? Like, I must not have willpower. I must not have self-control. I must not be a real adult if I can't use a to-do list. What's wrong with me? Or like, why is it that I can only exercise if I take a class? Like, why can't I put myself first? Why do I always just have to do something because somebody else is telling it to me? Or, why is somebody constantly questioning my judgment or undermining my authority? It's like, when you understand the tendencies, you understand like why people are behaving the way they are, and also with ourselves, why we might be experiencing certain kinds of frustrations if we're trying to do things in a certain way. And the fact is, you don't need to change. You're fine. You just need to set things up maybe in a different way and take advantage of the power of your tendency. Because if you're setting something up in a way that is like contrary to your tendency, you're much more likely to fail.
Right. Yeah. Knowing thyself is a helpful endeavor, I would say.
Absolutely.
Well, you had mentioned the Happiness Project is sort of what you're most known for. And was that your original book then?
No, that was my fourth book. So I'm a good example.
Oh, okay.
Or was it my fifth book? I'm a good example of somebody who was an overnight sensation after 10 years of work.
Right.
So I wrote many books. I wrote 4 books. Happiness Project was my 5th book.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Well, I'd love to hear, some insight into that book, that project, if you will.
So the Happiness Project I got the idea for it in a very inconspicuous moment. I was in a crowded city bus in the pouring rain, and I looked out the window and I thought, what do I want from life anyway? And I thought, I want to be happy. And I realized I didn't spend any time thinking about whether I was happier or if I could be happier. And I thought, I should have a happiness project. So I ran out to the library and got this giant stack of books and started doing research. Like, what would you do if you were going to try to make yourself happier? Can you make yourself happier? Is that even possible? What is happiness? So I got into it, and I often will become very preoccupied with things. Like, I just went through this whole thing of being really obsessed with color, and I'm obsessed with pain, and I'm like super interested in smell. And so it's very common for me to get really interested in a subject. But this was like so compelling to me, and I was just reading so much and taking so many notes that finally I was like, wow, maybe this should be my next book. And so I thought, wow, I'll write a book about this, about my happiness project. And I took a year and I divided, and because that seemed like long enough for real change, but not so long that, you couldn't see the end of it. And for each month, I identified a theme, an area where I thought I could make changes that would make me happier. And then I thought of a handful of concrete, manageable resolutions to try as part of that theme. And so to see, like, well, would I get happier if I cleared clutter, for instance? The answer is yes.
Right.
And so it's all about, like, how do you make resolutions and stick to them? And like, what are the kind of things that are, you can do with without a lot of time, energy, or money. So my things are not like go on a 10-day silent meditation retreat. Not that wouldn't be great for somebody, but it's like that wasn't realistic for me. I needed to find things I could do as part of my ordinary day, as part of my ordinary responsibilities. Sure. And so so that book is about what I tried, what I learned, and why I tried the things I did, what the research was, what the kind of the background, the context for a certain kind of resolution would be, and then kind of what happened.
So what did happen? What was the result at the end?
Well, the interesting
you were
thing,
happier, right?
That's an interesting question because, I think that we all have kind of a natural range of our happiness, and 50% of happiness is hardwired, it's genetically determined. 10 to 20% is life circumstances like age, health, wealth, occupation, marital status, things like that. And then the rest is very controlled by our conscious thoughts and actions. And so I would say, like, I'm the same person. Like, if I'm lying in bed or I'm like on the subway spacing out, I'm my same person. But what changed is that my experience of my life is so much happier because when I did all these things, like to have more fun and to have more friends and to have more energy and to get rid of things that made me feel guilty or full of remorse or annoyed me. And so I'm still the same person, but my life is happier. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yeah. And what's interesting about happiness, I'm sure you've probably heard before this idea that they've looked at people who have like a terrible accident or something and maybe paralyzed, and actually how happiness can adjust. Like people sort of, after years, they sort of readjust to the same level of happiness, in these dramatically different circumstances. And, have you heard about this?
Yeah, I think they don't go back to where they were. I think that's what later research showed, but they are very resilient. I mean, that's the thing about, people are very, very resilient. And in fact, across the world, no matter where you go, most people say they're pretty happy or very happy. Most people are pretty happy. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we don't want to improve their circumstances and give them more opportunities, security, health, education, all that. Because the fact that they're pretty happy, it's like, we might be like, well, you're pretty happy, but seems like things could be better for you. That's part of the sort of the kind of the human condition, which is marrying those two ideas.
Wanting to improve. Yeah. Always striving for sort of the next, level, the next greatest and grandest version of yourself, as I like to put it. And that gives us something.
People adjust to what's normal. And so if you could flash back, to pioneer days and be like, hey, air conditioning, people would lose their minds. They'd be so joyful. They'd be like, this is the most amazing thing of all time. Air conditioning is amazing, but we're used to air conditioning, so it doesn't give us the boost. And that's the hedonic treadmill, which is as you adjust to things, they just become part of your reality. TV was like blowing people's minds when it was introduced. Now it's like people don't. Yeah. Not like it, and this again is the resilience, and like we adjust to whatever is ordinary. So that can help us, and it can also mean that it's very easy sometimes to take for granted some of the most basic things like electricity or elevators, or I live on the 5th floor of an apartment building. I love an elevator, but am I thankful for my elevator every time? I mean, I try to remember to be thankful for that elevator, but it's easy to forget. Right. It's like part of our background reality.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the, radical gratitude for what you have as the path to sort of unlocking more of what you want to see in your world. By paying attention to that. Oh, hold on, I'm not going to take this elevator for granted. I'm not going to take advantage or take for granted this air conditioner or the fact that I have food in my belly and I'm comfortable at this moment. And I feel like that is a major path to, especially for those who are sort of discontent with where they're at and they're trying to get, their aim is to make changes. It's like, that's the doorway. Well, let's focus on that feeling, that energy of gratitude and what does make you happy. And that sort of attracts more things that for you to be happy about and pay attention to. All right. Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting this podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you an example, on the show Missing Links, the incredible researcher Greg Braden explores all the biggest questions concerning who we are, where we come from, where we're going, by connecting the missing links between science and spirituality to complete our understanding of humanity's history and to better understand the interconnectedness of all things. Awesome, right? And that's just one example. As you guys constantly hear me say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. So, you'd mentioned genes earlier, and that's the other thing, that I find really interesting when you're talking about happiness is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton. He was on the show a while back. He wrote a book called Biology of Belief and, the study of epigenetics that actually shows where we turn genes on and off based off of, sort of our beliefs and external stimuli and these things. And so that, have you researched that at all? And how it relates to happiness?
Yeah, that's a growing field and a lot of study. And things like if you have a mother who's very stressed or, is it's like World War II and you're living in Holland or something, how that does affect the genetic makeup of a child. That our genes aren't totally static, that some of them can be expressed more or less depending on circumstances. Now, in my own view, I'm very interested in what can I do? So I never look at things like genetics or things like what chemical is being released in your brain, because I can't make my brain release something. I can know that if I exercise, I'm going to feel better. I'm going to feel happier. I'm going to feel calmer. I'm going to feel more energetic.
Well, which is actually causing you, in that case, you are causing it to be released, though. You know what I mean?
I don't know that, and I don't control that. That's something where you need special machinery to measure that. And so I'm not interested in. To me, that's like I could read an article about that, but what I'm very focused on myself is what can I do in my own power with what I can see and touch and understand myself, because that's what I can really change directly. And so, so there's some people that are just very, very interested in what's being released and what's
going behind the door.
What's going on and behind the skull, and let's
under
get
the hood.
Really clear on that. But that's very specialized knowledge. And I think some people are very interested in it. You don't really have to know. You don't have to understand it. And then also if it's later overturned, which often in science things are overturned, or turns out we didn't understand cholesterol as well as we thought. Turns out it's a little bit more complicated than we thought. It doesn't really matter, because it's whatever it is, you're I feel better when I exercise. And so it does, do studies show that it actually causes longer life, or is it just causal? Is it just correlated with longer life? It's I don't know, but I feel great when I exercise, so that's good enough.
Right. Keep it simple. It's you don't need to know how your cell phone works in order to enjoy using it, is basically what you're saying.
Well, and I think people get very focused on what's happening to my endorphin level. I'm just I don't care what's happening with my endorphin level. But I think, and again, some people are very interested in that. That's just not my gig.
Right. Yeah, I find I don't go deep down the science rabbit hole, but I do like the idea of tying sort of, I talk a lot about belief creating reality on the show and so sort of more ethereal, spiritual kind of perspectives on things. So I really enjoy when, at the very least, understanding a high level of, okay, well, here's how the science actually ties in and supports a lot of these,
Absolutely.
concepts and ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I read a ton of it and study it too. Absolutely. I completely agree. It is fascinating and really does add a whole other element to understanding, to know the science behind a lot of these ideas.
Yeah. Even if it's just sort of surface level, certainly don't go deep down the rabbit hole like some people. But so, let's talk a little bit about your latest book, Outer Order, Inner Calm. Getting control of the stuff in our life.
Yeah, well, so ever since the Happiness Project came out, I've been so fascinated by why people are so energized by the idea of outer order. Because I talk to people all the time like, oh, you want to exercise more, or you want to eat better, or you want to get more sleep, or whatever. And people are interested in that, and they want to improve their habits. But when you talk about things like getting clutter cleared, people are like laughing or crying, like there's a supercharged emotion. They feel tremendously immediate gratification when they clear clutter. Like the Marie Kondo show. It's really just watching people get rid of their clutter. And it's like people are mesmerized. There's something about it that's just very, very enthralling to people. And so I wanted to dig a little deeper into why that might be. And then also just throw out a ton of ideas about how people can go about it. Because if there's one thing that links all of my work about human nature, it's that there's no magic one-size-fits-all solution that works for everyone. We all have to figure out the way that works for us. And so some people want to be minimal and some people don't. And some people want to do Marie Kondo's method and some people don't. And some people want to do it in the morning and some people want to do it at night. And that's fine. There's no right way or wrong way. It's only what works for you. And so in this book, I try to throw out a ton of ideas so that you can, they're all written in this very accessible form. So the idea is you just flip through and as you're reading, you're going to get all these ideas that appeal to you. Some of them you're like, I don't want to do that. And some you're like, I'm going to jump out of my chair right now and do that. So it's like a psych up book to get yourself, first of all, to get clutter clear, and then how to maintain it. Because we've all had the experience of you clean out your entire kitchen, and then 2 weeks later, it's like nothing ever happened. So how do you get there? How do you maintain it? And then how do you add beauty? How do you really get the most enjoyment out of your environments, whether it's at home or it's at work, or it's in your car, whatever.
Right. Yeah. Now Marie Kondo, that's the Japanese woman who wasn't there some controversy recently? Like people were kind of up in arms about some of the stuff that she was teaching in regards to the idea that all objects have sort of its own essence or soul. Or have you heard this?
I don't know about that specific controversy. Yes, Marie Kondo wrote a book that was a huge bestseller called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up about 5 years ago. And she recently had a show on Netflix that's had its first season called Tidying Up, where it's people tidying up and dealing with it. That's interesting. I hadn't heard that there was this controversy about that, but it's very true. She's from Japan. She speaks Japanese on the show. And she has kind of an animist attitude towards items. Which is interesting because I have heard people criticize her because at least in the book, you don't get this so much from the show, but at least in the book, she's very much throw everything away. Whereas a lot of people are you should really be trying to recycle this or give it away.
Right.
And she also is what her test is that everything should spark joy. And for many people, and I have to include myself in this, that is that's a bar that is not helpful to me. Spark joy. Yeah. I have a lot of things in my house that I use and that I appreciate that are not sparking joy.
My spatula does not spark joy.
Yeah, to me that's not a helpful test because it's like that level of emotional engagement is not helpful to me. But many people love it, and people talk about sparking joy all the time. But one of the things I found most interesting about it is she does have this idea of, because one of the things that we've all noticed in ourselves and in other people is that it's often very hard to let go of something. And maybe because you have sentimental attachment to it, maybe you feel guilty because like you spent good money on something that you didn't really use or never wore. Maybe it's related to like a fantasy self, like, oh yeah, I was going to learn how to play the guitar, but I never did. But now I have this guitar and I could still learn to play, but I really don't want to, but I could, but I should, but I bought the guitar, but what do I do? And so she has this idea that you can thank things. And you either thank them for their service, or you thank them for the pleasure that they gave you at the moment of purchase, or you thank them for embodying someone's affection for you as a gift, which you don't want, but you appreciate that it was a gift.
Yep.
And that allows people to let go of it. And I mean, I think that it's kind of irrational, to thank something that is inanimate, but I do think that there's something to it where for a lot of people,
I agree.
They do need to, and maybe it's back to your point about radical gratitude, that it just feels like, am I such a spoiled brat that I'm just like getting rid of all this stuff? However, I'm like recycling it, throwing it away, donating it, whatever. Like, don't I have any gratitude for the fact that I have all this stuff? And I think taking this moment of gratitude and being like, well, thank you, black cardigan. I don't need you anymore, but it was really good to have this black cardigan, and I did wear it a lot for years. I think there's kind of a practice in this idea of not taking for granted the abundance in our lives that would allow us to rid ourselves of these things, even if they're kind of weighing us down. So I think there's really something to it, but I can see why some people would be like, this is like, why are you doing this? You don't need to go around thanking your black cardigan for something.
Right. It depends on
my laptops are like to me, they are so close to me that I have them with me everywhere I go. I kept them for a long time, even when they've been replaced. And I mean, I had to let go of them. I took a picture of them. So I have a memento of all of their like little faces. And I had to say to them kind of in my mind, thank you. We had so much fun together. But now it's time for you to go and rest.
All right. It's probably a little easier with It's a little easier with artificial intelligence. You know, we're getting closer to the robot with our laptop, whereas our black cardigan is like a little less like that. But yeah, it's actually Shintoism, if I'm pronouncing it right. I wasn't remembering it earlier. I just looked it up.
Yes. And I think she went to Catholic school, so I don't actually know, but I know she was a Shinto. She served in a Shinto temple. And she has this practice where she introduces herself to the house when she arrives. So it is a very different perspective, and I think that's part of what's interesting about her method and her approach is that she's coming from a different tradition, and I think that gives her an unusual perspective. But she's got a very specific way. Like, you're supposed to do everything in a certain order. Like, first you do clothes, and then you do books, and you're supposed to take everything you own in a certain category and pile it together. Like every item of clothing that you have, or every book that you have. To me, I would have nervous collapse if I went through my apartment and put every book that I had in one giant pile. I mean, I'd have to take 2 weeks off from work to manage that. That would not work for me. That's her method, and for some people, it's fantastic and works. But I don't think it's the only method that can work. And if it doesn't work for you, I don't think you have to think that there's something wrong with you or that you're somehow a failure. It's just like that's a tool that works for some people, but there's other ways to do it. And so I try to suggest a lot of things so people can really adapt it to their circumstances, what works for them, what comes most easily to them. There's a lot of ways to achieve our aims. So you can do it whatever way works for you. Yeah.
Agreed. It's anytime we get into the sort of the dogmatic sort of idea that my way is the only way, I think we're in dangerous territory because, like you said, we have lots of different personality types and lots of different paths to achieve certain aims. And as far as getting that, I think the reason when people really clear away the clutter, it feels so, so much better to them is this whole idea that the outer is a reflection of the inner. I always say on the show, talking about the more esoteric stuff as, everywhere you go, you're there waiting for yourself. It's always a reflection in some way of you. And so to me, I think that's the root reason why it's really important to create an environment that is a reflection of how you feel. And if it's this really cluttered or hoarder type environment, there's probably something that most definitely going on, something psychologically that we need to evaluate.
Yeah, I mean, we do feel that our circumstances reflect us, and they do reflect us because they reflect our habits, they reflect our values. Our possessions are often tied to the people and places and activities that we love. And when we feel like our circumstances are an accurate and positive reflection of ourselves, and that's very exciting and affirming. When you feel like, well, everything here is like related to a fantasy life that I don't really lead, or it's related to a life that I used to lead but I don't lead anymore. Like all my clothes are of a different size than I can actually fit into. Or I have a bunch of toys, but I don't have any children living at home. Or I have a bunch of suits, but I don't have the kind of job where I wear suits anymore. Or if there is a bunch of stuff that you don't need, don't use, don't love, it just gets in your way. It just makes you feel kind of clogged.
Right.
And so, some people don't mind clutter. I mean, my sister, I mentioned my sister's my co-host. My sister's clutter blind. It doesn't bother her. She does not see it. If she lived by herself, the cabinets would be open, the drawers would be open, the mail would be everywhere. It just doesn't bother her. So I'm like, fine, it doesn't bother you, you don't need to work on it. But usually you're with other people and you have to work, create an environment that works for them. And then sometimes it just becomes unworkable because it's like, if you can't find your keys or you can't find that invitation because there's just so much stuff, or, you don't have any clean clothes because you haven't done laundry in so long, then it starts to be like, okay, I need to deal with this because my life just isn't working. And so, and then some people really want everything to be beautiful and like every container has to match and be labeled with a P-touch and be the same size. And then some people, I'm like, I don't need that level, I don't need things color coded. But, so it's all about what's that right level for you. Because, nobody wants to be surrounded with just like junk.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I fall somewhere between our siblings because my brother is the opposite of your sister. It's like if there is a piece of paper out of, disheveled on his table, he's freaking out. And I like to have it tidy and clean. But if it's ever not, or, I don't freak out. With some people, it's like him, it's like it really is unsettling if things are messy. Yes. And so it's really interesting
I worry about the open office for people like that because I don't think I'm that extreme, but I definitely prefer things to be orderly. And also it's like, if I'm working and it's all my stuff, it doesn't bother me. But if I'm in somebody else's environment, like we're always like other people's clutter looks much worse than our clutter. That I think that's true for many people. Right. And I walk into offices all the time and I see these open offices. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just like want to run around and be like, do you need this? This belongs in the trash. Why is this here? This doesn't belong here. Why don't you put these on the bookshelves? Are you really using all this stuff on your desk? Like, why do you have this stupid promotional doodad that I'm sure you've never used? It's kind of just visually overwhelming to me. And so people often talk about the noise problems and attention problems created by open offices, which I absolutely feel as well. But no one ever really talks about the visual noise. And I think I would find the visual noise very, very difficult to manage because I have my own little tiny office, and it's like I'm constantly working on it in my office. But I have different standards from a lot of people.
It's funny that you bring up the open office because, like I mentioned, my brother and I have a travel company together. Probably about 20 or so of us there. In the office, it's an open office, and we were really concerned at first when we moved into it, and we got noise canceling headphones for people. We're having conversations, and that seemed to work really well. But yeah, he would go around to these open sort of dog bone style, seating, and like, oh, what is this food sitting here? You know what I mean? Like, and I'd like. Freaks him out.
Well, in fact, one of the things that I suggested in the book, and I would love to hear if anybody ever did this, is one of the problems with offices is the lack of that people don't know who owns what. So it's like, even if I don't think that this glass vase that is like been sitting there for a year doesn't belong there, it's not mine. So do I feel like I have the authority to do something with it? Because it's sort of like, well, I'm in this shared space, so like, oh, there are these files here, but I can't just decide that they're trash and throw them away because I don't know who they belong to or what they're for, if they're important or not. And like, maybe the person they belong to like left, it doesn't even work here anymore. But how do we figure that out? So I was like, you could have a chief clutter officer where somebody actually has the authority to go around and say, like,
the CCO.
I'm going to make a box of unidentified, unknown objects. Come and get it, or it's going to be given away or thrown away or recycled, or like, whose thing is this in the corner? Like, you can't put this here. Because we want our floors to be clear because it just looks ugly to have a bunch of junk on the floor. Like, oh, you got all this stuff under your desk. This was something I'd seen with my sister that I had never noticed before, but I realized is a big thing. It is stuff under your desk. I never thought about that as like being potential space until my sister, like, she couldn't even sit at her desk because there was so much junk under there. So again, it's like, but who has the authority to march around and say,
right?
So maybe make somebody the chief clutter officer who can kind of make it their job to say, okay, well, we're gonna have a giveaway.
We've coined the new position.
Yeah. I bet somebody volunteer. I would volunteer if I were in an office. I would do that. I would do that with my free time because I would love to do that. I love clearing clutter. Other people's clutter is the best because you get the emotional high without any of the decision fatigue. So it's like.
Interesting. That I'm gonna leave you to that one because I don't think I want to go. You see, I see like Hoarders. I've seen that show, years in the past, and I'm like, oh my gosh, these people deserve a medal.
That's really a form of mental illness. That's really a form of mental illness. That's not.
No, totally. That's extreme.
I don't think that's the natural place people are going. I think that's something different. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That's what pops into my head instantly when I think, though, of clearing other people's clutter. So, so let's switch gears here just for a moment. The listeners know I love hearing stories of synchronicity, serendipity, positive paranormal story, even if you have something like that, and would love to hear if you have a fun story up your sleeve.
Well, here's a fun story. About kind of the feeling like your love is fated. So I met my husband in law school, and we sort of fell in love at first sight. And I had to break up with my boyfriend. He had to break up with his girlfriend, which we did. And then we started going out, and we got engaged very quickly after that. And so it was like this very this was meant to be.
Right.
And one of the things that made me feel like, oh, this was meant to be was, so my mother and then my mother-in-law to be, as we were engaged and I was starting to pick out things to register for, as one does when one's getting married. And so my mother came to me and was like, I don't pay any attention to China patterns, and so I don't really have any views on this, but I do have to say that there is this one China pattern that I love, and I've always admired it. So I just want you to think about it, because I'm not saying you should get it, but I want you to take a look at it. And I was like, okay, fine.
Right.
Then my mother-in-law, who at the time I didn't realize how deeply out of character this was, but now that I know her, decades, I'm like, this was so unusual for her to express a view like this. My mother-in-law said, you know what? Pick whatever you want, but there is this one that I've always thought was especially pretty, and you should just take a look at it. And all the bazillion China patterns in the world, my mothers-in-law both picked the same one.
Oh,
and this
wow.
was really important to me at the moment because, first of all, it made it seem like both sides of the family. This was like a symbolic moment that of an important kind of symbolic thing that we were going to be kind of investing in, which was like our China pattern, which is, kind of an iconic wedding decision that you make, that both of the mothers individually had come to the same conclusion, kind of out of nowhere. This is like, if you're going to mention, I'm going to recommend one book to you. I mean, it's like, there's so many, and it was so unusual for either one of them to say it that I felt like this love was meant to be.
This is a sign.
These families are meant to come together. My husband and I are right for each other. So of course, I didn't even look at any other China pattern. I'm like, are you kidding? The universe has spoken. I'm getting Arcadia. It's very pretty. It was perfect for me. So it was.
I was about to say, I hope you liked it at least.
No, it was perfect for me. It was a great choice for me. And so, so that was a moment where I really did feel like the universe was smiling on me and giving me an auspicious signal so that I would know. And then actually, weirdly, both of all our parents have the same wedding anniversary, which is not our wedding anniversary.
Oh, wow.
But that seemed nice too. It felt like this pairing was fated. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's very interesting, especially if it's my parents have February 14th, right? So that's that's kind of like, okay, that's not that original, and you can see how people would have.
27th. which is weird.
Oh, wow.
March 27th is a very random day to be married. It's not like June 6th or something. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I talk about that sort of thing all the time on the show. I mean, I have a 10-minute birthday synchronicity story where, it's my dad's birthday as well as mine, and my great-grandmother and my great-great died on that day. And I had a ex-partner whose boyfriend committed suicide on that day with it goes deep, but I talk a lot about those sorts of energetic threads, if you will, that are sort of like a wink from the universe. You can see how the threads are tied, and we go deep on that topic on the show all the time. And it's like the more you start noticing those sorts of things, the more that you start kind of uncovering there's a whole lot of energetic threads going on, in all of our lives. I think most people are just sort of not tuned into it that much, and so they miss them. So that's a very interesting one, the anniversaries too. Well, this has been absolutely wonderful, Gretchen. I appreciate you taking the time to come on and share. And I'm sure, people are going to want to connect and check out your show. Maybe you could just tell the listeners the best way to connect with you and check and follow your work.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I have a podcast called Happier with Gretchen Rubin, and you can listen to that wherever you get your podcasts. I have a website, GretchenRubin.com, which is where you can find, I post there all the time about my adventures and happiness and good habits and human nature. Plus, there's all kinds of discussion guides and free resources and one-pagers and checklists and all kinds of things like that, if you're looking for that. And I'm on social media as Gretchen Rubin, just my name, Rubin, on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. I love to connect with people. And then I have all my books, which you can buy wherever books are sold, as they say.
Right.
And I do love to hear from people with their questions, their insights, their observations. I think we can all learn from each other, and so I love to engage.
Wonderful. Well, I do have one final question here to leave you with, and it is this. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Gretchen Rubin?
Meaning of life. Wait, hang on. Let me think about this. You'll have to cut this out. The meaning of life. What is the meaning of life? I think I thought of an answer to this question, and now I can't remember what my answer was because you sent the thing. I looked at it right away.
The meaning of life is to remember the answer.
Remember the answer. What was the question? I mean, this seems so obvious that I was trying to think if there's a different answer, but I think that there is no other answer, and the meaning of life is love.
I would agree with that statement wholeheartedly, pun intended. And Gretchen, this has been.
See that? Yes. Well played. Yes.
This has been amazing, Gretchen. Thank you so much for all that you do, and I look forward to, hopefully our paths will cross in 3D at some point. And until then, journey well.
Thank you. So fun to talk to you. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. Before we sign off, I wanted to let you all know that we have finally created the Game with the Universe on our website, where you can choose the first number that comes to your mind, and it'll pull up that episode number of the podcast. I've been saying this is a great way to co-create synchronicity and magic with your higher self for quite some time by doing this manually. But now, if you go to positivehead.com/YO Universe, there is a super fun and simple interface to play this game with your higher self. I firmly believe just by setting the intention to play in this way, it opens up the door for magic, and it's a synchronistic way to hone in on nuggets of wisdom out of the huge catalog of episodes that are specifically appropriate for you at this time in your journey to becoming the next greatest and grandest version of yourself. And it also makes for a super fun way to engage and invite friends, family, people on social media to check out the podcast as well. So be sure to check out positivehead.com/YOUNIVERSE And be sure to tell all your friends so they can play a game with the universe, which also helps the show to reach new people, which I greatly appreciate. And as a quick reminder, be sure to also check out positivehead.com/transformation if you're curious to learn more about Purium superfoods and why I take them every day. On this journey of becoming the next greatest and greatest version of ourselves that we have all embarked upon, I can't stress the importance of managing your physical vibration enough. And quite honestly, Purium has put together the simplest plan I've found to do so, and I'm sincerely excited to share it with all of you. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.